Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Coper, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Gaining a Competitive Edge Through Research Analytics, which is sponsored by Ex Libris. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. All of the attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. We'll be using the Q&A feature today, so please use it to ask questions of our presenters. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you throughout the presentation. Also note that there is closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom right corner of your screen. Also note that we're recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version. And with that, we're ready to get started, so I'll pass things over to Sarah.
Great, thank you, Sabrina. Hi, everyone. I'm going to take just a moment to introduce myself. Thank you so much for joining us on today's webinar. My name is Sarah Branch. I'm a research solutions specialist with Ex Libris. I've been with the company now for about 3 years. My role is to act a bit as a product expert. And so I've worked with both Esplero as well as Pivot RP, which is our funding opportunity database. I came from academia. My background, I was an assistant professor of psychology before joining Ex Libris, did my PhD at Purdue. So I come from the researcher experience side. Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff Horn, also working at Ex Libris with our Esplero product and research information solutions. And I also joined from the academia side, having been a staff member, business analyst in the Office of Research at University of Michigan. So I'll be in the shoes of some of you and in the shoes of people that you'll be partnering with as you do research, analytics, and contributing work.
All right, thank you. And Bill, I had to give up remote control to unmute myself. So if you'll give that back to me, that'd be great. And while we do that, I'll just go through briefly what our agenda is today. So we wanted to start by just talking briefly about what is analytics in Esploro. We're using Oracle. So I'm going to start with just a very brief introduction to that. And then Jeff's going to talk a bit about getting that data actually into the system. We then wanted to expand to talk a bit about some actual customer use cases we have, talking about what we're calling standard analytics, only because it is more common library tasks and initiatives. Again, things that our existing users have shared with us, either examples of what they're doing or conversations we've had. And then Jeff will talk about some more advanced type analytics that you would potentially be interested in doing, different partners you could have, stakeholders across the campus, as well as talking about some additional use cases via API. All right, so the analytics in Esploro. So Esploro, if you're familiar with Alma, which is Ex Libris's library management product, you may already be familiar to some degree with the analytics. So Esploro, like Alma, offers comprehensive analytics and reporting via the Oracle Analytics server, as well as their data visualization tools. So across all of our products, Ex Libris Analytics really enables you to run reports on your library activities that help you understand how the library is performing, which can help you make informed decisions about running the library. And Esploro Analytics specifically allows you to run reports on your scholarship, research activity, and even your researchers themselves. So the data in the Esploro Analytics is organized into subject areas and specifically offers myriad subject areas, including research assets in Esploro. So this is all of the data related to the assets themselves, including basic information like counts, but also a number of fields related to those individual assets, which I'll talk about in a moment. The research asset usage information of particular importance is information around a number of record views as well as file downloads. And then additionally offering information about grants, projects, researchers, and that smart harvesting process, which some of you might be familiar with. Each of those subject areas really includes myriad dimensions, both measured and descriptive. So this is an example of the research assets subject area here. And what you can see in the image to the left, I believe, the blue circle with the individual arms. This is showing you some of those various dimensions that are available for the analytics related specifically to those research assets. And then being able to see some of that count or measured information that's available as well. Something similar that you're looking at with the research assets usage subject area here. And you can see 26 separate field descriptions underneath this subject area alone. When you add together the various field descriptions under the multitude of subject areas, and you can really build reports by combining across them, you end up with hundreds of field descriptions of data that you can be using to build out your analytics. And just to kind of briefly put them up here, here are those dimensions for the grants and the projects as well. So it's a very comprehensive body of data related to the research and scholarship at the institution. Altogether, we really call this the Research Information Hub because there is so much data related to scholarship at the institution. It is worth noting that there are a number of other features in the Esplero analytics here that are valuable. So you can use out-of-the-box reports that have been provided by Ex Libris. You can create your own reports, and then you can group reports that can be displayed on your dashboard. You can track and report these metrics and analytics at different levels, including the individual level of the researcher, at the level of an organizational unit, like a department or a college, and then at the overall institutional level. So you have a lot of tools when you're using the Esplero analytics. Now let's talk a bit about how we actually get that data into the system, which is one of the most important questions.
So I'll be walking you through how some of the data is gathered and assembled and put together in Esplero. So at the beginning of collecting data, you start thinking about the sources that you need in order to capture, in order to create the reports that you want. So the fundamental elements are faculty and student data, depending on what you're after there. Organizational structure, so people's home administrative units, the department responsible or housing a project, scholarly and artistic work, so the actual works themselves, the metadata around them, and the full text or image or video or whatever it may be. External sponsorship, so grants associated with that work, and teaching and service activities. And there are several other types, but these are kind of the core of what's generally present in reporting, and also looking across the columns tend to be the sections of the CV as well. So you bring all that into a centralized system like Esplero, and then that lets you produce a few key things. So the institutional repository is one of those, faculty profiles is another, and then today we're going to focus almost exclusively on the analytics portion of it. And I wanted to call out one specific data gathering challenge as it relates to publications. And if you saw our prior webinar about the smart harvesting machine learning and how that works, you'll see I've repeated this slide, but I think it's important because we're seeing, as we talk to institutions, overlap of effort because there's siloing in different systems people have elected. So generally a provost office will have a faculty activity reporting tool, and because they're the provost, they can compel everybody to type in the data. You end up with 100% completeness, but typically pretty poor metadata, pretty poor persistent identifiers. The library generally has an institutional repository. Deposits are usually optional, which results in a lower completeness than the faculty activity reporting, because the library couldn't twist people's arm quite as much as the provost office. And the metadata tends to be excellent. You've got full text, great access to the work. And then the research office may have a third application. There's a good chance they've got faculty profiles of some sort. Those tend to be characterized by automated harvesting of the data. The completeness tends to land somewhere in the middle because of that automated harvesting, not depending on the optional deposits. And there tend to be good persistent identifiers, maybe some OA links, but not quite as good as the institutional repository. And the thing that we're asking here is a better completeness and quality trade-off possible? So can we take the 100% completeness from faculty activity reporting? Can we figure out a way to get the excellent metadata and full text? And can we automate the harvesting process? So that's what we're trying to do in terms of the data gathering. Take the faculty activity reporting data, bring that in, bounce that off of our central discovery index in order to obtain the right metadata, the full text, and automate some of the harvesting, discovering publications for people on an ongoing basis and bringing those into their profiles so that you can have timely reporting and be up to date on faculty members' activities. So I'm going to transition back to Sarah here to walk us through some of the analytics that are possible once you've gathered up all that data.
And the title of this presentation is about having a competitive edge with your analytics. It's not surprising that every time we talk about Esplero, the question of analytics and data and metrics always comes up. We know that the library is an important institution or important element to the institution and provides a lot of value to the overall institution's competitive edge. So for an individual university, having a good quality library and strong resources can help to attract and retain top tier academics, researchers, faculty, even those graduate students, and all of that contributes to the overall prestige of the institution. The quality and depth of the resources that the library offers can also determine the quality of the university, the quality of the research that an academic university itself produces, as well as many institutions actually involving their library staff in the process of research, even including developing things like grant funds and bids for funding. Outside of just that, the library itself is interested in having a competitive edge by demonstrating that overall value to the institution for requests for resources when we're talking budget and staffing. So having the data and analytics to really show the impact of the library, especially in supporting scholarship and research, can be incredibly important. So what are some of those kind of standard analytics that we've talked with our customers about? Here you see the kind of existing Esploro community, and we were fortunate enough to have a few of them share with us some of the analytics that they've been running. And where we don't have specific examples, we've pulled some data from just our demo environment, but to discuss what some of those standard use cases are that we've been hearing about. We really broke this out into 4 areas. The first is the collection development strategies. Research trends shift over time, and we know that the library and the institution wants information that can influence their collection development strategies, ensuring that they have the right type of content and information to support the most important research topics. And then being able to support emerging trends in the research landscape. We know that the research landscape can shift over time, and often the library can actually provide the resources and tools to support those new emerging needs. Being able to assess that scholarly impact, and then also being able to support those broader institutional goals and initiatives. So these were kind of our 4 types of standard library tasks and initiatives. So how does the data in Esploro help to support those? So the first here is that collection development strategy. There are a couple of use cases that we've heard from current customers and users about how the data in Esploro can help support this. So one of those examples here is looking at the top journals that various academic units or departments are publishing in. So the the library wants to be able to provide access to the research that their faculty members and researchers are actually publishing. Knowing where they're putting that work means not only that the researchers are publishing there or putting their work in that resource, but also that their community and other users need to be able to access that. So being able to see what are the top journals where various organizations organizational units or departments are placing their work can be important data and information for developing a collection strategy. More generally, and in terms of looking ahead, the library may be interested in being able to provide the resources that match the kind of research strength areas or interests of the institution. So I know this slide might look a bit small, but what I did here was for essentially the last decade, and again, this is demo data here, but I looked at some of the keywords that were appearing with publications and how frequently they were appearing across time. I think COVID-19 here is a great example because of course, COVID-19 wasn't appearing as a keyword on publications prior to 2019. But when you're looking at COVID-19 or any of these other terms, you can really start to see where trends fall. And is there a new area of research interest that's really becoming popular, either generally or specifically locally within the institution? And the library might be interested in identifying those new key areas of research interest and ensuring that they have the collections to support that work. The library is also interested in assessing some of that impact. And here, when we're talking impact, we're specifically talking about usage. So with a solution like Esplero or any of the other repositories in the sphere here, there's a certain interest in knowing, is traffic being driven to that repository? Is traffic being driven to these institutional academic publications and resources? So here you can see an example of data that's coming out of our demo environment again, but where you can actually see the requester type, so you can see where that drive actually came from in terms of getting people into that resource in the repository. Because our demo environment isn't linked out to Google or Google Scholar, you don't see that here, but in the full Esplero repository, traffic can be driven from Google and Google Scholar as well. Below that, what you see are essentially an export of the assets in the repository here with the top number of views. So this isn't limited just to publications. You can actually see that the top 2 or 3 assets there are actually creative works. And so it is important to note that with Esploro and having a system that can actually house and showcase all types of scholarship across all disciplines, it's expanding the information that the library has and can provide about which of these assets are really making an impact. Traditionally, a lot of the assessment of impact is based on grant dollars, and that's a strong representation of STEM. But here with Esploro, the library now has the opportunity to actually show impact across all different types of scholarship and really show it across all different types of disciplines. Another example here, you can see I just pulled by title, number of record views and number of file downloads, this being limited to a specific department. So again, information that is valuable not only for the library in terms of what content is being highly accessed, but also important information for the institution more broadly. And then of course, putting that into a data visualization here as well, again, across different asset types, being able to see the value and use of those other creative works. Now, additionally, the third bullet point we had here was supporting some of these emerging trends and needs in the research landscape. I think this is incredibly important. So the examples that I am touching on here are open science and open access. And in fact, this is a figure that came from one of our existing customer users. You know, if you're certainly in this landscape, and libraries perhaps are more aware of this than many, the increasing importance of open science and open access are perhaps 2 of the most visible shifts in the research landscape over the last 10 to 15 years. The reproducibility crisis across multiple disciplines, combined with new and emerging tools and technologies that really support open work much more than in the past, have driven a fundamental shift, at least for some people, in the way quality research is done. And so it's become very important that the library is able to support those types of functions, including especially open access. So what you're seeing in this figure is an institution that actually wanted to plot over time the shift in the proportion of their publications that were open versus closed. And you see the trend that's happening there with how much bigger those green bars get year to year to year is really paralleling that shift, that trend in the kind of research landscape. So the library here can not only see evidence of that trend, but they can also demonstrate how they are supporting that trend. And that speaks to being able to support some of those broader institutional goals and initiatives. So open access is a great example here. And I think I skipped my slides. Let me go back one. So here with the open access, this is again coming from our demo environment, but this is actually plotting across the number of articles that are in Esploro, how many of them have a file attached. So with some of our customers, they spoke to us about the institution having open access initiatives, or even more strongly, open access mandates. And the responsibility had fallen on them to try to ensure that their researchers were following those initiatives or mandates. And so here, this data provides a tool to ease that responsibility and increase engagement and compliance with those open access mandates. Now, what the library could do is go one step further with this data. Not only do they know which of these departments might be more engaged with open access, but they could also then get a list of the specific publications and the specific authors that they need to reach out to have them add those files in. So again, supporting not only being able to demonstrate and see those trends and support them, but also provide important role in terms of supporting a broader institutional mandate or initiative. We often hear that similarly with ORCID, and this is once again a figure that's coming from one of our actual customers, where they were interested in knowing across different kind of user types at the institution, so between grad students and faculty members and different levels of career stage, how many people had ORCID IDs. We hear a lot about ORCID anymore, again, as part of that kind of open science and open access work. But institutions really moving towards wanting their researchers and faculty to have ORCID IDs and being able to use that to connect their work and make it available. And so here, again, the institution, because of the data in Esploro, has the ability to not only plot out who's really adopting something like ORCID, but also then being able to see on a person by person basis who has that ORCID and even have that ORCID ID number, which can also be difficult to collect across the institution. So those are just a few of, again, what we're calling somewhat standard analytics, or supporting kind of known library tasks and initiatives. But certainly with a system like Esploro, there's much more you can do. And that's what we're going to talk about next with our advanced analytics.
Thank you. That's a great view of the core, getting work out there, complying with the open access mandates, getting found. So we're going to continue on with some partnership with other organizational units on campus, and you know what that looks like when the slides catch up, I hope. There we go. So in partnering with other offices, this is what you want to look like. You're going to look like you're bringing a present when you're bringing a good amount of clean data. So the image here is funny, but it's also representative in that it's somewhat of a burden to bring it, but it does look like quite a big deal. And I think you should be giddy if you could bring it to that level of value to the institution. So what we see in a survey we take of research office priorities among, so there's 106 research offices that answered across US, UK, and Australia. What we saw was that 66%, or the highest common priority there, was obtaining more funding to produce more research. So I think that speaks to the competitive nature and the overall imperative to increase the effectiveness, competitiveness of the institutional research enterprise. You can see the other ones there demonstrating the impact of the work, improved ranking and prestige, which is based in part on that, diversification of funding sources, and so on down the list. So high competition for funds. Most institutions are looking to expand their funding base. And of course, with the pool of funds can be better or worse from year to year, but it has often stayed relatively flat or even declined a little with inflation. So I think this paints a good picture of the competitive landscape that's out there. So what you get in the research world. And I remember this tracing all the way back to my days working at U of M, is there's a ton of financial pressure, and then financial transactions must be recorded. So you've got proposal routing and approval system that's tracing grant applications going out the door. You have that same system recording that something was funded, recording receipts from the funders, recording expenditures out of the project grant account in the sense of some check that could be written out of a checkbook. So the financial transactions have to be recorded. And then you get a little bit of use what we can measure analytics. So, we'd really like to measure this, but maybe we only have managerial attention to capture those financials. And the end result of adding these things together is you get faculty that are tired of being evaluated by strictly financial measures. They're spending a lot of their time on administrative matters, effort reporting, finding and applying to the next funding opportunity. And that has to come from somewhere. It may come out of their nights and weekends, but it may come out of their time in the lab too. So they want, or time writing, as the case may be, to produce these publications. So you can see the state of research here, which is a document prepared quarterly by the University of Michigan Medical School. And in it, we were able to just barely eke in output, influence, and recognition, bringing in publications counts, where I probably can't make out all the metrics on the screen, but pretty much the rest of them are financial, proposal related, a bit HR related in terms of FTEs. But the publications give you a view of the outputs of research, as in the product, the scholarship, the communications that are happening between researchers, versus such a focused view on the inputs, which are the financial resources going in. And again, here's the second page of that state of research, and it breaks it down by department. So the two right columns are leading indicators of financial performance, so award commitments, and then the awards pipeline beyond that. And you see that in a spot of high attention at the upper left-hand side of the second page is output, influence, and recognition metrics, again, with publications coming in, reflecting an overall productivity. And then you see the squiggly lines are spark lines that show you the overall trends in the database. Again, the second page of that report looking at the productivity. And then there are other more advanced things you can do in terms of describing collaboration in particular. And that is one that is fairly easy to extract from the database, because you have faculty members assigned to publications as the author in the relationship. Then if you turn that relationship around, other authors on it are that author's co-authors. And in the same way, sponsored project has a PI, has participants, has co-investigators, so you can analyze those relationships as well. So this is an image, this is a real image that went into a P30 application, and the large red dot at the center is the PI of the award. And the intention of a P30 is to show that there are groups of people working on campus, but not necessarily together, and that it would be good to put them under an umbrella award like a P30. So we were able to demonstrate that the PI was the most central to this arrangement of people, and that there were groups that were only bridged very well by that PI. So you see that, so the greenish group at the right is probably the easiest to decipher there, where they tend to work more together with the rest of the group. And then you see the dense interconnections between kind of purple, red, blue over on the other side. And you see that the PI is the bridge, exhibited the highest betweenness in the group. So they're the right person to lead the P30. And then separately in this example, We'd also used the publications data and the keywords tagged onto those publications to find and invite other members. This was a pretty significant award in the tune of over $1 million a year. So the group level of participation was fairly high. There were something in the ballpark of 90 members when the PI came to us. So he knew most of the people on campus working in the right concepts, but not all of the people. So we were able to execute a search and add a number more participants to the group in order to make sure that the membership at the center was indeed covering everybody working in these topics. So that's something that is a competitiveness factor, and an analysis you can only complete when the information is already in place by the time that you need it. And and it ended up being a competitive success story as well. It was the only new P30 funded in its round. So if I look at the external collaborations, this is another competitiveness factor in terms of building reputation for high quality output. Evidence shows that the more collaborative the work is across collaborators in different departments, different institutions, or different departments within the institution, across different institutions, across national boundaries with international collaborators, also between academic and industry collaborators. The more collaborative a work is, the more cited it tends to be. So it was a frequent question in the analyses of how many international collaborations do we have with this particular institution, this particular country. Maybe we're sending a group there and we want to understand the historical relationship. Maybe we just want to see which departments have fostered good international collaborations and how those came about, and which ones haven't, and how they might take advice from some of the others. So again, a competitive factor in getting scholarship discovered. And then for provost offices, what we're seeing is moves away from traditional faculty activity reporting in institutions that, and primarily, never had a FAR, never had a faculty activity reporting system, but are beginning to collect data in a centralized way. So it's been decentralized. It was up to the school or department on their own. And they said, you know, wait, places that have something centralized have sort of an advantage in having the data already together. And that doesn't necessarily have to drive the business process. So let's get together. And if you kind of recall from earlier in the presentation, those three different groups of faculty activity reporting, library institutional repository, and usually research office-based researcher profiles, they're like, okay, let's combine these efforts and collect the data in a centralized way, set a baseline. And then also we see this in institutions that are decentralizing away from their faculty activity reporting system and returning the workflows back to the schools and colleges and departments. So what that looks like with the institutions that we're piloting this with now are the faculty and student data continue to come into the system. Scholarly and artistic works continue to come into the system. Teaching and service activities come into the system, with some increased focus on our part on the that latter group there. And then using the built-in reporting engine, you produce a standard report that is the baseline data that is then provided to the school, college, or department's faculty activity reporting process. So in that way, everyone has a certain common baseline of information, and other kinds of reporting and profiles are possible. And also the business process is still up to the school or college or department. So that's those are the kind of the use cases that we're seeing out in the field. And of course, there are tons of other use cases via APIs. So any system that you're engaging with, I think it's important to consider, can I extract this data and use it for any other purposes that we don't even realize that we have yet? Or share it around in a permissive way in order to get the scholarship found and share and participate in open science and free to read initiatives. So there are APIs that expose the researchers, those researchers' assets, i.e. all kinds of publications and creative works we've been talking about. Configurations, analytics, and organizations. Probably organizations is the other one of the big three between researchers, assets, and the org structure, in addition to open access initiative protocol for metadata harvesting and stored deposits as well. And where that goes is into existing reporting infrastructure. So in much the same way that the publications were tucked in right alongside all kinds of financial reporting. If those financials are already reported in something that we see widely deployed, like a Tableau server type instance, then you can come in, consume the assets out of Esplero via APIs, bring that in parallel to the financials in something like that as well. And then university pages. So one of the most common repurposing that we see is consuming the APIs for republishing on the web. So maybe we've got a department page, lab page, thematic area that we want to talk about. Give me the last 10 things that were written by people in this department, kind of use case for republishing to the web. And then a data warehouse and institutional research for any and all kind of other custom or ad hoc analyses. The P30 graph image there being something that was made ad hoc, and the team formation being something that was done in an iterative process by arriving at the terms that were relevant to the center with the PI, and then using those terms as a query to return people who were matches and trading the list of matches who were on campus back and forth. So, you be sure you can take the data out with you, tinker with it, put it in other websites, put it in existing reporting infrastructure, and use it in any way that's valuable. Sort of we hope the direction of the future is away from the collect it several times. Everybody sort of uses their own partial view of things to collect it once, get a nice complete view, and then repurpose it many times. And we think that that'll help with institutional competitiveness, both by what it enables in terms of reporting and analysis, and also on a cost basis as well, because you don't have these different fragmented systems and duplications in the workload. So I think at this point, we want to turn it over for Q&A. And hopefully we've got a few questions accumulated.
Yeah, thank you to Sarah and Jeff. That was super interesting. I think we have a couple coming in, but I just encourage attendees to send their questions in now. We have plenty of time to answer a few. Looks like we have one in the queue right now, so we'll just get started with that. What differentiates Esplero from products such as SciVal, Insights, or academic analytics?
Jeff,
Either
you're
of
an
you.
expert on that.
Yeah, I think I can answer that, especially since I've worked at both Elsevier and Clarivate before. So the SciVal is primarily about analyzing Scopus as broken down into institutions and authors, and is sort of how the rest of the world sees you. Insights, much the same way, takes Web of Science, breaks it down into institutions, author profiles, and paints a picture of how does the rest of the world see you. Academic analytics, similar, except for they incorporate some other information from iPad surveys, from client-to-client data sharing about number of PhDs awarded, those sorts of things. The publications data is primarily based on cross-ref with human editing. So then that is also how the external world sees you. So it's a bit of an apples and oranges in terms of how much you know about your own institution versus how much the public knows about other institutions. So I think that's where the comparison is. So those tools are landing on one side of it, using public info to analyze how the rest of the world sees you. And then you have the built-in reporting and analytics that's closer to universities, institutional research, BI type functions, looking inside. And some of the key differences that makes is you've got a much more complete publications list for faculty, especially arts, humanities, social sciences, that tend to not be reflected as well in the STEM databases, or maybe there is no central external database of that information. So you've got a higher coverage percentage when you're looking at your own people. You also have much richer data on awards and the participants on those awards, which form some of the most valuable relationships, as well as for external groups, you would not have the ability to track proposals, i.e. what people are trying to work on. And some of the most fruitful matchmaking that I did when I worked at the university was based on proposals, rather than anything that had been historically funded and published, because the proposals are, again, what people are trying to work on. So you connect people into prospective projects that may or may not know that there's somebody else on campus working on that same topic. So the analytics in Esploro would be more like that internal BI function, and more akin to what you would see in Pure rather than SciVal from Elsevier, in terms of the having built-in analytics. The key difference there is analytics there being in-house, where we outsource that to a major vendor, i.e. Oracle, in order to have sort of that rock solid stability, common UI patterns, the sorts of things you saw when there were facets on the screen. So I hope that's clear. Sort of like, how does the rest of the world see your institution on an apples to apples basis, not knowing 100% of the publications and not knowing a lot about the grants data, versus I know a lot about my institution and I'm going to deeply analyze that. So I know who's doing what and how they're connected and how many partnerships we have.
That makes sense. It's helpful for me. So I think that answered the question.
I'm going to actually jump in because I get a lot of these questions when we're doing demonstrations. And Jeff, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more actually about the APIs, specifically what formats are they in? And I know you mentioned it, but if you have any other specific use cases where current customers are using the APIs to export data or use it in other institutional systems, that's a common topic.
Mm-hmm. So there are definitely users. I don't think I know all the different sort of corners of the institution where the data is reaching, because it goes in the data warehouse and you lose track of it sometimes. I'd say that the main ones are, there are the regular API endpoints that are described on that page. And if you want to play along, just check out developer.exlibris.com. I think it's either developer or developers. I always forget which, but
I can put it in the chat for everyone.
Yeah. So if you go there, you'll see that there's the regular API calls. So you would do something like call for the publications that pertain to a particular person. You'd get back an XML structure with a whole bunch of publication metadata in it about them, about the co-authors on it. The OAI PMH. So this is for Open Access Initiative Protocol for Metadata Harvesting. So that is for other systems to come in and absorb the data. So there you might get something like an open source profiling initiative that you can come in and suck up that data. in terms of, where else it could go, that could go into multi-repository search networks, which is great for increasing the discoverability to external parties. And then SWORD for deposit is pretty commonly used among institutions. So making systematic API based deposits and overwrites of work to correct different fields to sort of push content in an automated way. So those are I think the main ones that I can think of, and different institutions are using it for. I can't remember if the OA compliance that Sarah showed was in system or out of system. I think that one was in the system, but other people are producing similar reports where you're looking at the stats, and they prefer their own thing. They prefer their Tableau server or business objects or whatever they've got. So they pull it into their data warehouse and use it there. And then the other one I mentioned, web use. Give me the last 10 publications from anybody in this department. Kind of requires you, pull it down and then filter to the last X many that you want to see.
And I know we've also been working with an institution who's actually using Salesforce to build profiles. And they're actually pulling in a lot of the research asset data into Salesforce from Esplero via those XML APIs. Right. Another question that I get a lot gets back to grant funding, and you mentioned grant funding a little bit, but what specifically, in your time over your career, Jeff, what types of kind of analytics or metrics are you seeing funders more interested in now, and how can Esplero help support that?
Now, funders, they want to see that they're funding the right team to do the work. So then I've seen things like copy and paste research resources describing a particular big ticket item or shared service facility on campus be effective. That's a capability that we hadn't discussed, but that's one that I've seen be effective because investigators can show up, copy and paste a good description and prove that they are in the right place to be doing the work. The P30 example is an attempt to show that it's the right people to do the work, and the right leader has been identified at the institution. So that's, in the peer review process. So it's not the funders per se, but the peer reviewers, and then the funders by way of those peer reviewers are looking at, is the science compelling? Is it something that should be done? Is it the next logical step to answer this? Is looking at the risk reward. And then do I think that this group can pull it off? And the time, effort, budget that's being allotted here. So that's those sorts of analyses can emphasize the last of that this is the group that can pull it off, and hopefully make it easier along the way. So helping ID members by searching for concepts that people are working on campus, or even just having a ready list of publications and that pertain to a topic, so somebody can filter, looking at subject matter and maybe highly cited work. So sort by most citations, filter to only publications that mention topic X, because that's what the grant's about, can be a short path to the key publications to include on the bio sketch.
And my last question for you then, Jeff, I feel like I get to interview you now, is that looking ahead at the roadmap and the development plans for Esplero, is there anything that you think is most exciting when we're looking at the future of analytics in Esplero?
That's a tough question. It's the analytics are evolving rapidly. What's next on the horizon is more about collaboration and analyzing the department to department or whatever criteria, unit of analysis criteria from inside to external partnerships. I would say that the deeper analysis of that coming, as well as us adapting how we look at external affiliation data, is going to provide sort of both the clean data and the means to analyze it at the same time. So the collaborations, I think, is the big what's next thing.
I agree. Great. Bill, if you'll just go, it doesn't look like we have any more Q&A, but if you'll go to that last slide again, that's our contact information, which I'll leave up here for a few minutes. If anybody had questions that we didn't get to or you didn't feel comfortable putting in the chat, you have both of our emails and you're certainly welcome to reach out to us.
Yeah, I should mention that analytics is a very case dependent thing. So we've tried to go through a number of examples, but of course, every institution is going to have their own questions, historical tweaks on it, things people want to see, legacy, technical stuff or analytical debts that they've inherited from those that have gone before. So, the possibilities are about infinite. So if you've got questions that pertain to a specific use case, definitely email it to us.
Great. Yeah, and while we're still here, I'll just mention if you do have any questions, feel free to send them through. But in the meantime, I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's session, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording. There's also it looks like we have a question from Laura, who says, since so many funders require open access research outputs emanating from funded research, can Esplero provide evidence of OA status for those publications? Do you anticipate any sort of linking to assets other than publications, such as supplemental data?
Maybe I'll tackle the first part and Sarah tackle the second. So yes, can track OA status. I think the might take a little bit of imagination, but if you recall the one graph that tracked the OA proportion of publications underneath that, you can get down to the detail level and then do further analyses that way. So you would be able to get down to the OA compliance percentages with respect to funded research, the numbers that have an attachment or link as well, to be sure that the data is there. We in our data gathering do go out and tap into sources like Unpaywall. And then I've written a few custom things that also tap into open access button and cross-ref metadata retrieval, just to try to pull down DOIs in order to get solid numerical matches for publications. So we go out to those external sources, IDing that in addition to bringing those into CDI. And then so you can track that on a publication basis. I guess I'll turn it over to Sarah for the other part about, I think data sats as an object would be helpful.
Sure. So yes, absolutely. For those individual research assets, there is a field for whether or not it's open access, and you can run analytics all related to that. So certainly for providing to a funder that is in an open access source, or even using Esplero to make something openly available, can be done as well. And then in terms of anticipating linking between assets and other types of assets like supplemental data, absolutely. So currently in Esplero, for any of those asset types, in this case, we'll use the example of a journal publication. a researcher could have also deposited the supplemental data, separate research materials, even figures that maybe weren't in the actual official publication. But all of those can be in Esploro as individual assets with connections built between them, or even on that individual source, like the publication, some of those supplemental files could be attached to that record as well. So in answer to your question, yes, you can definitely link between something like a publication and supplemental data, and would be able to demonstrate that. You can also, if the institution subscribes, you can mint things like DOIs and handles through Esploro as well.
Great, thank you both. And Laura says thank you. So yeah, we do have a couple minutes left, but so if there are any other questions, please send them through. But I'll just remind viewers that we do have a survey at the end of the presentation. If you could fill that out, we'd really appreciate it. It helps improve our presentations. Yeah, with that, I think just a reminder that we did record today's session because we always get questions about that. And thank you to Sarah and Jeff for presenting. It was a really informative and valuable discussion. I did not know that you could track open research that way, so I thought that was really interesting, and I think our viewers really appreciated it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.